long time, Audi design has basically been the hamburger of the car world. Everyone likes hamburgers. You don't really rave about a hamburger, but you never really meet someone who doesn't like a hamburger. The Q8 is not a hamburger. This is like going to a restaurant and your lobster gets served on a piece of black volcanic rock and then somebody somersaults out of the kitchen and sets your meal on fire. It's quite bold. The Q8 gets a lot of attention. It gets stared at, it gets pointed at. I mean, it has just been launched in this country. It's brand new on our roads. But the other day in traffic, somebody asked me to wind down my window, which, I mean, you don't wind anymore, you just push a button, obviously. But he was like, wind down your window. And he shouted across the traffic and told me how amazing this car is. And at this end of the market, the reason you're willing to pay so much for your car, the reason you're willing to take such a huge hit on depreciation is because you want to be noticed. You want to make a statement. Trust me, when you arrive anywhere, you will be noticed in the Q8. This is now the second most expensive Audi you can buy in South Africa. At just under 1.4 million rand, it is in line with its rivals. But our test unit was spec'd to just over 1.6 million rand. But in terms of sheer size, at least, this is a lot of car for your money. This is a large thing. The Q8 is based on the Q7, and even though it has the same wheelbase, it's shorter this way, and wider, which gives it this sort of fat pit bull appearance. And I don't know if this Navara blue is the best color for it. It loses those hard lines and edges which make the design so unique. It comes out standard on 20-inch wheels. You can have 21s, or you can opt for these 22s, which will cost you 40,000 rand. And even though it rides on relatively low profile tires, the Q8 still rides extremely well. I did a 1,000-kilometer road trip in this car and it was exceptional. It's a sort of car where you could drive for 5 straight hours and then climb out feeling like you've just driven to the shops. Particularly on this optional air suspension, it is incredibly refined. I mean, the only reason I know that the car is touching the road is because I have a general understanding of the physics of how motor vehicles make progress. Other than that, yeah, I mean, I could be floating. But all that being said, it is about as good as a car should be for a price tag like this. At the moment, there's only one engine to choose from and only one model in the range when it comes to this new Q8 in South Africa. The engine is a V6 3-litre turbo petrol and it has about the same amount of power as the V6 in the Range Rover Sport, but a little bit more torque. Now, it is unbelievably quiet, but it is lacking some of the torque you might want in a car of this size and of this nature. And that's a problem that the diesel engine won't have, and that engine is arriving in the country later this year. And it also might sort out the problem of the fuel efficiency. So we've been averaging around 12 on the open road. We averaged around 11. The diesel's going to be a lot better than that. But the thing is, if you want to call your car an SUV coupe, then it has to be a bit rewarding to drive. It has to be a little bit of a driver's car. So, is it? Well, it's definitely not slow. I think this car is fun to drive in the same way that the Airbus A380 might be fun to fly. You're pretty much the biggest thing out there. No one really is going to stop you. You just kind of steamroll over everything. And what this car does incredibly well is get to unbelievably high speeds without you even really noticing. You actually have to be pretty careful when you're driving this car out on the open road to avoid spending time in jail. Seriously, keep a close eye on the speedometer. Luckily, there's a heads-up display as well telling you what speed you're going. But it's that sort of car. You can imagine heading into Germany, getting on the Autobahn, doing 250 k's an hour, no problem, and getting to lunch in the next town in 5 minutes. Welcome to the future? Well, I mean, this isn't the first time I've seen this sort of layout in a car, but it does feel very futuristic in here. There's a screen in front of me, really big one actually. Then there's a screen over here, which you might expect, but then what you might not expect is a screen down here, a third one. Now the Range Rover Velar has this set up already, and you might remember we filmed that car earlier last year, but I think it's a bit better executed in here. All the graphics are a little bit more crisp, and interestingly, with the touchscreen, it now has haptic feedback. So when you press something, it makes a bit of a click sound and actually feels like you've pressed a button. That's very cool. And then down here, this third screen, that's for your sat nav and your climate control mostly. A couple of other things in there as well. So if I want to go and search for an address, you don't actually have to type it in anymore. You can just write it. A-I-R-P-O-R-T.
A-I-R-P-O-R-T.
That's really cool, except now you're going to need to employ someone full-time to just clean all of this for you, because it is impossible to keep this clean. And I can now see where I just wrote airport on my screen. That's going to drive me mad for the rest of the day. However, when you're spending this kind of money on a car, you're looking at cars like Range Rovers, Porsches, that sort of thing. And when you get into some of those cars, you're going to see a lot of leather. And that's really missing in here. I mean, of course, the wheels leather, the seats are leather, but up here, this is plastic. And over on the door shoulders, that's plastic as well. And in a Range Rover, even in something like a Jag F-Pace, that's all going to be leather. And I don't know, call me old-fashioned. I mean, I don't like to sit in front of the fireplace in my leather wingback chair, sipping sherry, rubbing my feet into my polar bear rug, but I'd kind of like some leather for 1.6 million rand, and I think a lot of other people will too. In isolation, this is a very expensive car. 1.4 million rand for a car. You could buy two very nice cars for that money, and this particular unit that I'm driving is spec'd to just over 1.6 million. Holy moly. But even in saying that, it is pretty much bang on with the competition like the Range Rover Sport and the Porsche Cayenne, and I have no doubt that in this SUV mad country of ours, these cars will sell. But I think this car's very existence is going to have that halo effect on the rest of the Audi range, particularly the SUVs. And there's so many to choose from now. Q2, Q3, Q5, Q7, and I've driven that new Q3 coming later this year to South Africa, and that's a very good little car. I think if you had asked anyone what their dream car was maybe 10, 20 years ago, they might have said something like an RS6 or an M5 or some sort of supercar. But these days, I think people aspire to own big SUVs. I think this is the new poster car of our generation. The Q8 is not as dynamic as the Cayenne, but I think it is more interesting. And it's not as luxurious as the Range Rover, but I think it's smarter. And in this tech-obsessed world, that does count for something. Overall, as a package, I'm not sure if this car feels like it's worth 1.6 million rand. But I think that might actually not matter too much. I think what Audi needed was a new dream car, a dream SUV. And I think in this new Q8, I think they've got it. What?